Hello, college football fans. Welcome to episode 215 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined, as always, by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans and college football fans.
Hello, everybody. Somehow we are here now at the beginning of December, the end of another regular season of college football. Feels like it always flies by so fast, doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does. Because, I just don't get it.
That's right. Well, we are back to our usual remote setup here, and we'll be talking about from our favorite team, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, the Iowa game, and our unfortunate loss there. On the positive side, we do have good news to talk about for the women's volleyball team from Nebraska and their placement in the NCAA tournament. And then, of course, in the national world of college football, there are all the crazy games from week 14, all the coach carousel craziness that has gone on over the past few days, and now the playoff rankings that were released today on December 2nd, and the implications they have for the conference championship games this weekend.
And, as we do all this, Alex, we do this, on December 2nd. That's a Tuesday. Tomorrow morning is signing day, which would have historically been, one of the high holy days of college football over the last 30 years of my life, 40 years of my life. I'm aging myself here, where I would be scouring, either magazines back when all I had was Huskers Illustrated magazines and reading possible, descriptions of players and stuff, anticipating tomorrow morning's announcement and the press conference, describing our signees and all that sort of stuff. There was tremendous enthusiasm about that whole process. And now it's an afterthought. We won't even hardly do it except mention it right now. Right.
Yeah. I mean, still a big deal when you hear that, this player signed, this one didn't, this guy's waiting for the second signing period or whatever.
Right.
But yeah.
Oh, it's huge.
Not the event it used to be.
Right. Exactly. It's a fraction of what it used to be, but still singularly very critical to the future of your program.
Yes, very true. And as always, we are a father-son duo here to talk about college football by college football fans for college football fans. And we've got to stick with our tradition and open up a cold beverage here. I know Husker fans could use one after that Iowa game. I got myself a Golden Road Mango Cart.
All right. And I have fallen back on Keweenaw Brewing Company from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. My Kim, your mom, my wife, has a couple of beers left from that brewery. This one is called the Keweenaw Bell. It's a American wheat ale that is infused with blueberry, and it is surprisingly good. So one of her favorite beers, and she's got a couple of them left, and I decided I'd have one of those tonight.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
So yes, we are going to kick things off with the Nebraska side of things, which does include the Iowa game. On last week's podcast, I was being the more pessimistic one, saying that we were going to lose to Iowa, but I thought we'd play closer than we did against Penn State and lose 30-21. Well, you went ahead and were optimistic and thought that if Iowa came in wanted to pass it more than they wanted to run it, and made some mistakes, we could manage to pull out a win and win 23-21. However, the final score ended up being 40-16. So quite similar in many ways to that Penn State game, both in terms of the score and in terms of the drumming they gave us running the ball down our throats. Once again, looking at the stats, it's 379 total yards for Iowa to 300 for Nebraska. So it's not like we didn't have anything going. Emmett Johnson had 217 yards. So he had a great game. But not so much for TJ Lateef, who got dinged up in this game. And, some of our receivers, drop some passes. You know, it was a very cold day there in Lincoln. And unfortunately, we didn't quite see some of the coaching changes, or not coaching changes, but scheme changes, you know, play changes that we were hoping to see from our coaching staff.
Right. Bottom line is I saw no successful attempt or execution at changing up our approach after being drubbed by Penn State. And my optimism about the team was that we would see the coaches go back to the drawing board and come up with and scheme around trying to be more dedicated to stopping the run. So, and basically taking advantage of the fact that we had some pretty darn good defensive backs. And even though we might be forced to put them on an island, we would then be forcing the quarterback from Iowa, in this case, to actually, deliver some strikes and do that, which he did do. There were some tremendous throws and catches that Iowa made. They made some spectacular plays, which they always find a way to do against us. And part of that is we're always playing them at the end of the year, and they're just really well coached. And so their players definitely get better as the season goes along. And they're ready to make plays when they play us.
You and I were together last week in San Diego. We went to the Del Mar racetrack during the second half of the game. So we watched the whole first half, then kind of parts of the second half, which ended up working out because the second half was when things really went downhill. And we saw that one long play by Iowa where they threw the ball and the receiver had a spectacular underarm catch because our defensive back was there, you know, covering him well, but he managed to make this great catch, you know, to put them up by, you know, even more points. And at that point, you got to just kind of put up your hands and say, okay, maybe they're just the better team.
Right. Well, and they were, but it also just continued to highlight the fact that we had deficiencies within our roster that many fans, including you and I was particularly vocal about it as recently or as early as last spring, that when we went through the last major portal season and were unsuccessful in securing some mature, older, and physically larger defensive tackles, and that we didn't find somebody along the offensive line that would be able to give us some immediate help at offensive tackle, knowing that we had a bunch of walking wounded guys who were coming off of injury and surgery, who hadn't been able to work out and, you know, build themselves and have the agility that you would hope to have of a fully healthy athlete, and we were kind of lulled into the optimism of that by saying we did okay and we really are optimistic about the guys we have and we're going to make this work, right? And everybody was rah rah cheer cheer. And the fact is that those problems were not addressed. They never were addressed. And once you get into the season, you are what you are. You can't change the roster at that point, and that's where we found ourselves.
Yep. But to, you know, put some positivity on the season, although it certainly ended disappointingly with the two rough losses. If you look back to our first podcast right before the start of the season, we gave our predictions for how the season could play out. And we both settled on 8-4, which was our optimistic but realistic prediction, where, you know, we would beat the teams that we thought we should beat and then lose against the teams that we kind of knew were going to be tough for us throughout the year. You specifically called out the Minnesota as a game that we would probably lose, though you thought we might beat Michigan. That was your early season prediction. So when you look at what ended up being reality, which is that we are 7-5, you can't be too mad at that, right? Like we are a step up from the 6-6 that we were last year at the end of that regular season. And so we are making, some progress, though it's not as fast as a lot of fans were hoping it would be. This was not the third-year jump, that we had seen in past years from Matt Rule at Temple or at Baylor. But really, you look at the fact, okay, we lost to Michigan, but we played them close. And we lost to USC, but we played them close. The ones that really stand out are the Minnesota game, 24-6, and then these last two games against Penn State and Iowa, although a Penn State and Iowa team that were favorites against us in both cases and, that had more talent in some key areas.
Right. And when you have fundamental weaknesses in a conference that's filled with good coaching staffs, they will abuse you because of those weaknesses. And that's what Nebraska demonstrated again. It's something that we've seen year in and year out for a number of years. And it seems like, our coaches, and part of that is, I know, if you're a coach, you gotta dance with the girl that brung you, so to speak. In too many cases, we find ourselves trying to deal with these built-in weaknesses that we cannot overcome. There's no scheming that you can do without incredible athletes in other areas of the team to overcome some of the fundamental weaknesses that we had both on offense and defense, especially along the line of scrimmages. And I know there's criticisms at every level of the defense, linebacker, even the secondary, that we have to do. The other thing that is interesting to note is, and I pointed this out to you since we were together for this game, Alex, was you looked at the pregame player injury list and the players that were out for the season and it's questionable for the game. And Iowa's list was, 3 or 4 here, a couple there, and maybe another 2 questionable. And Nebraska had a list that, no joke, was 15 players long out for the season. And that list included 3 of our top linemen on offense, a couple of our defensive linemen, and a number of other players at other positions, that were out for the season. That also screams for, what is it that causes that?
Yeah, looking at our strength and conditioning program and all that.
Exactly.
Now, obviously, we'll talk much more about next year's Huskers on future podcasts. Yeah, we still have our bowl game to go to since we are a 7-win team and all that. But I just would like to point out now that while we got 7-5 this year, our schedule next year is quite a bit tougher because we have to play against Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana. Basically, the top 3 teams in the Big Ten right now. We have to play against all of them next year, so you can say that those are 3 losses right there. And we have to play against this Iowa team we just lost to at Iowa, and against Washington, who's a solid team, at home. So just right there, even if we beat everybody else on our schedule, which is not a gimme, that's another 7-5 season, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, that's what, and I've been saying that for a while, that we could have a worse record next year and be a way better team.
Yes. And as I mentioned, that bowl game, we still don't know what that is. Obviously, that will all be announced after this upcoming weekend. But the current predictors out there seem to be saying either the Vegas Bowl or the Music City Bowl, which, pairs us up against other conferences. So Vegas Bowl seems likely we might play against Utah from the Big 12. Music City Bowl, we'd be paired up against an SEC team, so likely either Missouri or LSU. So whichever way you slice it, we'll be the underdog in all those games. And we've just got to hope that, we have the time here to recover. Maybe some of those injured players can come back and play in the bowl game, and that they will also have some of their key talent sit out and maybe make them less efficient than they were during their own regular seasons.
Right, exactly. Well, and maybe we can make some changes because we now have some time here to modify, our schemes and approach that maybe can try to address this weakness in terms of defending the run.
Yes. One big step in that, which I know surprised you a bit from our previous conversations, was that our defensive coordinator, John Butler, was fired after the loss to Iowa. Now he's only been defensive coordinator for a year, took over after Tony White last year. And I said after the Penn State game that I felt like he was on borrowed time, but I thought he would at least get through the bowl game. Seems like in today's crazy coaching market, which we'll get into later, you can't afford to wait. After the bowl game, if you want to do it, you got to kind of pull the trigger early, right?
Exactly. Well, apparently that people seem to think that way, and maybe there is truth to that because with all of these, with the big huge coaching carousel that's happened, there's going to be a bunch of musical chairs, right? And so if you want to get one of the guys that you believe is a top level, coach, whether that's an up and comer who's a coordinator or somebody who's an established successful defensive coordinator, if you waited around until after your bowl game, a lot of those people would already have engaged and gotten new roles, right? New contracts, etc. And so you'd be out of luck. So you have to act fast in this environment if you hope to get good possibilities.
Right. Now, this is just a rumor, so take it all with a big grain of salt. But the rumor I saw today was that SMU's defensive coordinator, Scott Simons, is one of Matt's top choices, someone we're going after. Apparently, he runs a 4-2 defense, and SMU's statistics against the run are quite strong in the Big 12, or not the Big 12, rather the ACC. Not so great against the pass. So it's from what I saw from some fans was like, well, it'd be ideal if we could hire this guy, as our main DC, and then keep John Butler as the defensive backs coach, like he was previously under Tony White, right? Because he's great at that.
Right.
Though I know you had said that he accepted that job at Nebraska, kind of with the promise that he would become the defensive coordinator down the line. So maybe, he wouldn't have been satisfied with just that role alone, for his, his experience level.
There's no doubt in my mind. That's absolutely true. I'm sure that he's quite angry for what Matt did to him, right? Because I'm sure he's feeling like, okay, you know what? You didn't fulfill your promise. Now, I'm sure Matt told him, neither did you, right? I hired you and expected, an A quality defensive coordinator, and I ran in and I encountered a guy who was in over his head, who when the going got tough, just started throwing things at the wall and experimenting and stuff. Had no answer, right? He was just guessing, and you can't do that, right? You have to have a concept, you have to have a plan, you have to coach that plan, and you have to build confidence in your team with that plan. And he did not do that. So both are probably feeling like they didn't get the bargain that they had signed up for.
Right. But what do you think about this Scott Simons guy?
I don't know that much about him. I saw that report. I hope they're wrong because, again, I want somebody, ideally, I'd love to have somebody who's actually had some Big Ten experience, right? You'll recall a few years ago, well, it was the time that Matt Rule was hired that year, when Wisconsin fired their head coach, they promoted their defensive coordinator to be the interim head coach.
Right.
And he was an outstanding defensive coordinator, pretty much one of the best in the country over a period of 3 or 4 years in the Big Ten. Okay. Jim, I can't remember his last name. Anyway, the key point here is that, then they kind of, he thought he was going to get the job. He was certain he was going to get the job almost. And then the AD there at Wisconsin decided to go with Fickle and really pissed him off, right? So I would like nothing more. And that coach is currently not a coordinator. I believe he's coaching in the NFL, in a position role. And I would love to go get him and bring him back into the Big Ten against, for one of Wisconsin's pseudo rivals, if you will. He might be quite interested in something like that. But now, you got to figure that he's also maybe eyeing the Penn State's head coaching job or some other head coaching jobs. I don't know. But he's a guy that would be on my list, and I believe has the history that would be much more palatable to Nebraska fans and to me personally. I want somebody who has Big Ten experience, who's demonstrated that they know how to stop the run.
Right. So, yeah, his name is Jim Leonard.
Jim Leonard, yes.
Yes. And you are correct. He is currently the defensive backs coach and pass game coordinator at the Denver Broncos. This year, he was promoted to assistant head coach as well. So they seem to like him there. But yeah, if you're Wisconsin, given how fickle it's turned out so far, you're probably regretting that you didn't stick with him, right?
Exactly. And I don't know if with the associate head coach type role, maybe he thinks he's got a better shot at becoming a head coach in the NFL. If the Broncos defense were to continue to do well, I don't know, but as non-coordinator and this associate head coach, that's more about behind the scenes duties more than it is coordination duties, if that makes sense. Right. Yeah. So, but I would make a run at him before I would make a run at this guy from the ACC. Because again, in my opinion, there's a difference between ACC football and Big Ten and SEC football. Okay, there just is. Okay, and it doesn't involve the weather issues, the wind, the cold, the snow, all the elements that come into play inevitably almost every year in the Big Ten. And all of that stuff lends itself to a different roster structure and a different scheme that you must run. Okay. And I'm looking for somebody that actually has that experience and knows what the heck they're doing.
So now we'll transition over to the women's volleyball team for Nebraska. They were able to close out their final 2 games of the regular season against Penn State and Ohio State with 3-0 wins. We got to watch both of those together, which was fun. So closing out the regular season undefeated, which is obviously a big W for that team, winning a lot of all Big Ten honors, both for the coaching staff and for the players, which is great to see. But of course, the NCAA tournament was announced here recently, and Nebraska is one of the number 1 seeds going into the tournament as the favorite, going in as the undefeated 30-0 Cornhuskers. And so their bracket includes some other competitions such as Miami, Kansas, Louisville, and Texas A&M. Those are like the more likely teams we might face, the higher seeded ones, with us then fighting against likely Pittsburgh in the Final Four. I know you were worried that with how things were shaking out, we might get paired up against, either Texas or Kentucky, in our side of the bracket, or have these tougher teams, inside of our quadrant of the bracket. But seems like overall things played out pretty well for us, which is how it should be, given that we're, the top team in the country.
Right. Well, I would say a couple of things. We didn't get the most difficult quadrant, but we didn't get the easiest quadrant. Ironically, Pitt, who's the 4th seed in the tournament, got the easiest quadrant.
Right.
And it's inexplicable, and it has to do with how they put together this bracket. Okay, unlike the men's basketball and the women's basketball 64 team brackets, this bracket only seeds the top 32, right. And then the other 32 basically get organized for purposes of minimizing travel, trying to balance, conference alignments and things of that nature, not getting too many matchups too soon in the tournament. Some of these kinds of things get in there, and they have so many things in their formula, and it's never really very, very clear what their priority is of things. Is RPI the most important, and then top 25 wins is second, and then eye test is third. You don't know, because different teams get placed in positions, and then if you talk to the committee people, they give you wildly varying answers that indicate that they are looking at all of those things at various levels of importance. So it's really kind of a mess to try to anticipate or figure out what these guys are going to do. So if I were to be critical of them, it's that I think that their positioning of these fourth and fifth seeds in each quadrant, okay, which is they're not consistent, right? The three seeds just aren't consistent. But overall, Nebraska can't worry about any of that stuff. They get to be at home all the way until the Final Four, assuming they make the effort and win these games. Clearly, when you get to the Elite Eight, you're going to be playing a good team no matter what. So how good that team is irrelevant. The only issue that we have is our third game is probably going to be harder than a lot of other teams' third game. But our fourth game, if we get to that, will be, pretty typical.
I see. So by the third game, then you're referring to likely either Kansas or Miami.
Kansas or Miami. Yeah, I mean, I would hope for Miami, frankly, for Nebraska's sake. I think we could match up quite well with Kansas. But Miami has a little bit of a flair because they have a player that's a consensus first-team All-American, most likely, and is one of the most prolific attackers in all of college volleyball, and is one of the finalists for Player of the Year. Okay, they also on that same team have a setter who is a foreigner, but who's here, who played for her country in the Olympics, and so she's an Olympic setter, right? So they have two extremely good players. They also have a gal who has an incredible serve, just an amazing server who has more service aces than anybody else in Division I. So when you start seeing those kinds of people, those folks could, even though they're not a better team, those individuals with that individual talent could rise up and dominate you because all the stars align and they just kick ass, right? So that's the part that makes this a little uneven.
Right. All right. But obviously, we'll be playing against our first two rounds of the tournament this week, which are against teams that we should be able to beat pretty soundly. So we'll dive more into that situation on next week's podcast. We'll be talking about the playoff and bowl games for football, as well as the upcoming major games for volleyball.
Now, there's just two things I would mention, and then we can move on, Alex. And because for our listeners, the thing for them to maybe understand is why are we talking about volleyball? This is not only is this a undefeated number one ranked consensus number one volleyball team, but it's doing some things that are historic. It has a volleyball player who just broke a fairly long-standing record for the highest hitting percentage in the Big Ten for a Big Ten season in history, not just this year, but ever. Okay. Additionally, as a team, we hit our hitting percentage as a team was also historically the highest hitting percentage over the course of an entire Big Ten season that has ever been done. So these players are literally historic, having only lost one set in the entire 20 matches of the Big Ten season, and really only 7 sets lost in the entire year. So quite impressive list of accomplishments that they've done, and why they're getting lots of Big Ten awards and things like that. They're a very, very good team, but they still got to go out and prove it on the court.
Right. Yeah, because those accolades are great and all, but years from now, will people remember that if they don't win, the national championship?
Precisely.
Yep. So that's what we got to hope for, and that Coach DBK can keep the girls focused. Now, on the national side of things for football, we're going to go ahead and start with the games from Rivalry Week. We did predict a couple of those. Of course, one being the Ohio State-Michigan game. Since I predicted Iowa to beat Nebraska, I went with my heart and thought that Michigan could maybe upset Ohio State since they were playing at home, and the weather prediction was for it to be cold and windy, perhaps snowy. I thought maybe their running game could give Ohio State some problems. So I predicted that they would win 24-21, while you went Ohio State's way 27-21. And the final score for that one ended up being 27-9. So you're right on Ohio State's point spread, but you vastly underestimated Michigan's struggles, even though the weather did play out that way, right? It was very snowy the whole second half, but Ohio State actually got their own running game going in quite an impressive way.
Right, exactly. My path to a Michigan victory or keeping it close was had to include, the running game from Michigan being a major factor. And a couple of things happened. Their available running back, I won't call him the starter because he was already the second team guy. The first teamer having already been injured and gone for the season. He, who was a really good stalwart running back, got hurt in like the first series or two of the game, was sent to the sidelines and never really was a factor the rest of the game. And so they were down to their third team running back, which obviously hurt their ability to maybe be as effective running the football as possible as they hoped. And then without that, I think, Ohio State's defense was able to really be fairly controlling of Michigan throughout particularly the second half.
Yeah. The final yards of the game ended up being 419 to 163. Michigan settling for 3 field goals for their 9 points and being scoreless in the second half. So, Michigan's defense, fought valiantly, right? Held Ohio State back, gave them some trouble for sure. But when your offense is struggling that much, it's hard to win.
Yep, I totally agree. And bottom line is a little bit like us with Iowa. Ohio State was simply a better team.
Yep. And then there was also Texas versus Texas A&M. I predicted that A&M would win that one 38-31 and continue their streak in the SEC. While you actually went Texas's way, since it was a home game for Texas and the refs might be on their side, and predicted Texas would win 28-24. And the final score of that one ended up being 27-17, going Texas's way over A&M. So you were right on that one. And yeah, it ended up being a pretty crazy game. A&M had a blocked field goal early, and we're actually up 10-3 at halftime. So, not a lot of scoring by either team. I know it was 3-3 for quite a while. But then they had 2 interceptions in the fourth quarter. I believe one was while they were close to scoring, and then the other was while they're making the final drive of the game, and they threw an interception that kind of ended off. We noticed, we kind of tuned into the game late and commented on the Mike Elko, Texas A&M's coach, bad time management on that final drive, not using his timeouts when he should have, or players not going out of bounds. It was just kind of strange to watch.
Right, exactly. And of course you had to sprinkle in a few very questionable calls throughout the game that made it clear that the guys in pinstripe had a preferred victory, preferred team that they wanted to win, which is pretty classically Texas football.
Oh, yes.
Or Texas sports, actually.
Very true.
I would say generically.
Very true. Which obviously was a huge shakeup to the college football playoff because A&M was very highly ranked, so they, of course, had to drop down from that loss. So that was one of the shockers from this weekend. One that could have been a shocker for sure, didn't quite end up being that way, was Oklahoma versus LSU. Oklahoma ended up winning that one 17-13. But I watched the recap of that one, and frankly, you got to feel really frustrated if you're an LSU fan that you couldn't pull that out.
Yeah.
Both teams had interceptions. I remember Oklahoma threw an interception early, which gave LSU great field position. And then LSU threw an INT right back to Oklahoma at the 4-yard line. So LSU was primed in position to score and kind of squandered it there. And they were actually up 13-10 with 5 minutes left in the game. Their defense had played very well, kept Oklahoma away from scoring, but had a terrible blown coverage, wide open guy, which gave Oklahoma their 17 points. And LSU ended up with 3 interceptions total in the game. So it's another one where Oklahoma's offense did not play very good, but their defense was elite enough to keep them in it.
Right, exactly. And that has been kind of a thing with Oklahoma, right? Their defense has held them into some games where their offense was kind of ugly, right? And this was another example of that. It also shows, again, in the post firing of a coach, that the talent level on that LSU squad is quite high.
Yes. Also, in the Big Ten, Oregon played against Washington. Oregon won that one 26-14. I watched the recap of that game, and Oregon was actually up 13-0, so they got off to an early start. But Washington managed to kind of slowly come back. Wasn't really anything too crazy in that game in terms of turnovers or whatever, just a good back and forth physical affair.
Yep, I would agree. That kind of is what we thought was going to happen anyway, right?
Yeah. I mean, I could have seen Oregon beating them more solidly for sure. Washington has struggled in some games this year.
Yeah, that's true. It's a bit of a rivalry though, and I don't remember what the weather was like, but my recollection is that it wasn't great, and so all that stuff, along with it being at the end of the season, tends to drive scores to be more close, right?
Yeah. Then another interesting rivalry game was Georgia versus Georgia Tech. Georgia won that one, but it was 16-9. So kind of similar to that Oklahoma game or the Michigan game, right? Georgia Tech had to settle for 3 field goals. So they really struggled against, Georgia's elite offense, but Georgia couldn't put the game away, even though their defense was playing so well, right? Georgia Tech was making some good plays. So that's a big question mark for me on Georgia going into this championship weekend.
Right. Because, I don't perceive Georgia Tech as being all that close to elite in terms of their team. So I was expecting Georgia to handle them a little more easily. But again, it's a rivalry game, end of the season. Lots of people are banged up, all that sort of stuff. But you know what? You got to find a way to get that all sorted out. Okay, you're past that. Now go play your conference championship game. So we'll see what Georgia can do now that they've kind of gotten past the hump of the Georgia Tech, because that was not a pretty performance.
Yep. And then there was the Iron Bowl, which we did talk about last week, mentioning how even though Alabama seems to be the far superior team, Auburn fired their coach this year, but, you never know with the Iron Bowl. And it turned out to be the case, because even though Alabama dominated early, went up 17-0 in the second quarter, Auburn slowly kind of fought their way back, managed to tie up the game 20-20, and it was looking like it was going to be, perhaps a surprise upset. But then Alabama went on this drive down the field and got bailed out on 2 incomplete third downs by flags from the refs. I believe one was pass interference, and then one was roughing the passer. You and I were listening to the Auburn radio broadcast at that point in time when we were driving home, and so of course they were not pleased with those calls. I watched the recap of the game, and I will say on the roughing the passer one, the Auburn radio guys were making it sound like their Auburn guy got pushed into the quarterback. That wasn't really true. He didn't get pushed, but it was kind of like, he wasn't going at the quarterback with like full force, or it wasn't that late or anything, but it was below the knee. So that was what the ref said, because he hit the quarterback below the knee. That was why the roughing the passer was called, which I honestly don't know if that's, the fully correct interpretation of that rule or not, but that was the logic there.
I see. Well, and again, Alabama should be able to handle an Auburn team that's very middling of the road, SEC level, if they're going to be a championship team, right? So you would expect that to have been a little more straightforward, and that's been kind of their MO. I don't know that Alabama has played a complete game yet this year. They've looked really good for stretches, but then they find a way to go to sleep and just kind of do weird stuff.
Right. I mean, I would say their win against Georgia, they definitely looked good. That's probably their best game of the season.
True.
Well, and to add to Auburn's frustration, they had a lot of dropped passes where the quarterback threw it right and their wide receivers just dropped them. Admittedly, that quarterback also threw a crucial interception when they were close to scoring at one point in the game, and then again on their their second to final drive of the game, and that was the interception you and I saw, and it was basically over. But Auburn's defense actually did stop Alabama, force them to punt it. Now Auburn literally only had 7 seconds left, so it was pretty much just a Hail Mary situation. But still, that goes to show how much trouble Auburn's defense was giving Alabama after that initial kind of scoring spree.
Yeah, exactly. So, again, so it sounds like we've got a couple of SEC schools that maybe both were looking past, right? Maybe they were already thinking about the conference championship game. I don't know. But since both of these schools are SEC and both of them played Podunk U the week before their, historic rivalry game, you would have expected them to come out with a far higher level of efficiency and focus and everything like that. But yet, we've seen this before, and then you watch the SEC championship game here this weekend, and you're going to see two teams that are just flying around the ball, showing off the freak athletes that they have, and looking every bit like a national championship contender.
Right.
That's what I would expect.
And then two other quick games I wanted to highlight that stood out to me for their scores. One was Vanderbilt versus Tennessee. Vanderbilt won that one solidly 45-24, putting up 579 total yards of offense on Tennessee. So that's a very good win for Vanderbilt. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, Louisville from the ACC totally destroyed Kentucky 41-0, perhaps being a factor in Mark Stoops from Kentucky getting let go.
Right, exactly. Yep, because again, you're talking about a end of season rivalry, not a conference game, but much like the Georgia Tech game, an ACC versus SEC affair, and crazy, right? But Louisville's good. I don't understand why they weren't better throughout the season, but I know that they're very well coached. I have great respect for their coach, and he obviously had a plan to kick the tail off of Mark, and that doesn't make me feel bad at all. I have a little bit of irritation as a Nebraska fan for Kentucky, as over the recent last decade, let's say, the tensions between us and them have been quite strained as it relates to football.
Right. And then in the days immediately after Saturday, we saw the coaching carousel go into high gear, spinning at a rate we haven't seen in quite a while. So I'm going to go through a big list here of some of the changes that have happened. Of course, the big one that, people were talking about all year was, where was Lane Kiffin going to end up? Seemed like it was going to be either LSU or Florida, and it ended up being LSU. He left to become the head coach at LSU, along with the majority of his offensive staff from LSU, which leaves Ole Miss's defensive coordinator Pete Golding being promoted directly to head coach. So he's going to lead them through their playoff, opportunity that's coming up for them. And it sounds like he's going to be the full-time head coach. He's not even the interim guy.
Oh, really? At Ole Miss?
Yep. That's what I saw, at least.
Wow. Okay. Now I know that the offensive coordinator is staying on with them, even though he does intend to follow Lane to LSU. He is going to stay with the program to give Ole Miss continuity through this potential, playoff run.
Right. But, you saw a lot of drama, on X and all over social media, about Ole Miss fans, booing Lane Kiffin as he got on the plane to leave. The Ole Miss, his clothing rack, ending up outside in the parking lot, of the Ole Miss athletic department or whatever. And people remember that Lane Kiff also had an ugly exit from Tennessee in the past. So he's a very talented coach, but he clearly has a history of doing this.
Well, and at USC, but it was reverse at USC. Because remember, he was head coach at USC as well, and he got fired on the tarmac. So coming back from an away game in which his team didn't play well, the AD met him at the tarmac and fired him right there, which is bizarre. So he's had quite the scenarios with his deal. And, somehow he was the Oakland Raiders. Well, I don't know where they were. The Raiders of the NFL, he was their head coach for a short time as well and got fired abruptly there too.
Right. So I guess you could say maybe he's a little jaded from, some of his past experiences there.
Yep.
But, LSU's got their guy now, $91 million over 7 years there. Then we have some coaches from, the group of five and kind of lesser regarded teams kind of getting promoted into higher positions, such as North Texas's coach Eric Morris going to Oklahoma State. Arkansas is hiring Memphis's head coach Ryan Silverfield, and USF's head coach Alex Golish ended up at Auburn. There were rumors he was going to end up at Arkansas, but seems that deal fell apart and he got to Auburn instead.
Wow, interesting, very interesting. Well, and that Lane Kiffin price tag is absurd, right? And yet that's the new bogey now, right? That's what all the premier head coaches are now going to expect, and every one of them is going to get adjusted up to that level in some way, shape, or form.
Right. Well, we'll have to keep a tab on this Lane Kiffin to LSU thing, because obviously, Brian Kelly left a very good situation at Notre Dame to go to LSU, which I think clearly he regrets now. And Lane Kiffin has an Ole Miss team that's made it into the playoff, so he's already gotten Ole Miss to a level where they, can compete for the SEC championship and compete to be in the playoff. Obviously he has a ton of money and support that he'll get at LSU, maybe more so, that he could get at Ole Miss. But still, you're leaving a very good situation, on that gamble. So we'll have to see if it pays off for him.
Well, and that's the thing, and my prediction is 3 or 4 years down the road, unless things go really well at LSU, they'll spiral in a negative direction, because the expectation is national championship, right? Within 3 years. And that's kind of been the MO. And if it doesn't happen, then things start to get difficult there. Now, the irony, of course, is, and I don't know what Ole Miss's financial circumstances as a university and as a university athletic department. I do know, because it's much more public, that Louisiana State's financial situation is horrible. They are in massive debt, and they can't seem to get these boosters to give them money to get themselves out of debt. But if it's to give money for NIL, or to be able to hand out bags of money to guys with for handshakes at the end of games, they've always been able to find people to do that corrupt money, pay for play money. They never have a problem with that. And he must be convinced that the NIL resource that he's going to have at LSU is quite a bit greater than it would ever be at Ole Miss. Because frankly, I think from a recruiting standpoint and facility standpoint, he could have likely gotten everything he wanted and needed to compete for championships at Ole Miss. So and yet they would have been way more patient and willing to let him have a series of years of 9, 10, 11 win seasons leading up to maybe a chance at a national championship type of year, where at LSU he's not going to be afforded that kind of runway.
Less pressure for sure.
Yep.
Now the coaching carousel doesn't stop there. We have Tulane's coach, John Summerall, ending up at Florida after they missed on Lane Kiffin. So they're going the kind of opposite approach where they're promoting a young guy, who's done really well at the lower level, seeing if he can do it at the higher level. Similarly, UCLA hired Bob Chency from James Madison, who's also competing to potentially make it into the playoff from the Sun Belt this year. And then, as we mentioned, Kentucky fired Mark Stoops after 13 years of him being at that program with an 82-80 overall record. And they must have already had conversations with their guy, because they very quickly announced that he'll be replaced by Oregon's current offensive coordinator, Will Stein.
Oh, So Oregon has lost both their offensive and defensive coordinator. Wow.
Where did their defensive coordinator end up?
Cal. I think it's Cal.
That's right.
Luopoli, and he is a nationally recognized recruiter. This guy that went to Cal, and has just been quite dynamic and pretty darn good coach too. But was super dynamic. So be interesting to see what he's able to do. But that's got to be devastating for Oregon as they move towards playing in the playoff.
Right. What do you think about John Summerall at Florida? Obviously, that's one of the major coaching positions that need to be filled.
I think that is underwhelming, simply because you're Florida and you were looking for somebody who was proven, right? You'd like to have somebody who's proven, but I think they and the UCLA hire are both nods to the success of the Curt Cignetti hire at Indiana, right? And the challenge is, can they be given the time and the resources up front and the time then to build what they need to build.
Right.
And I don't know whether either of them will, particularly UCLA. I mean, UCLA is, digging out of a hole in a big way. It's a risk, but so are guys that have been, coordinators or even head coaches at the Power 4 level. They're risks too. The best hire, frankly, that I've heard so far, and the guy I would have wanted if we had lost Matt Rule to Penn State, my hope would have been that one of the first calls that went out was to Pat Fitzgerald, who now is the new head coach at Michigan State. And I think that's the best hire of all of them. That scares the heck out of me in terms of, us having to play a team coached by Pat Fitzgerald, regularly now in the future, because I can guarantee he's going to be a heck of a great coach.
Well, we'll talk about that. I want to mention real quick, Tosh Lupoy, who is the Oregon defensive coordinator. He's not officially going to Cal as of yet, but he's emerged as the top candidate. So the rumor mill is talking about him.
Okay.
Also seems like Will Stein will stay on as the offensive coordinator for Oregon through the playoff. So at the very least, Oregon's playoff, situation should remain stable, though,
okay.
Will the players, play the same way, knowing that this coordinator is going to be leaving them, both or offensive and defensive, it sounds like, so that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, that dynamic changes, and you don't know whether you're already trying to put together your new staff, and there's so much to do, and it just is almost impossible to do both jobs 100%. Right.
But yes, Michigan State fired Jonathan Smith in his second year as head coach. He went 9-15 in those 2 years. So it didn't give him much of a leash there. That whole comment you made about sticking on to coaches for longer is aging like fine wine, isn't it?
Yeah, I clearly got that one wrong. But here's the thing. Here's the thing, Alex. That John Smith, I'm shocked that they didn't give him more time. So there must be more to the story that the AD there or whatever felt that he had seen enough that this guy was not going to be the guy to get it done, right? Like there were other elements at play because you don't fire a guy after 2 years because he probably got like a 6 or 7 year deal. Most coaches get that, right? When they first start in their new job, they get a 6 or 7 year commitment because you got to have at least 5, otherwise you can't recruit. So they're usually 6 or 7 years, and you gave the guy basically 2 years. And really, when you think about when he was hired and all that, this is less than 2 years. And unless you had NIL coffers that were full, which we know the athletic department at Michigan State did not, that's just not fair, right? Now, as a backdrop to all this discussion about head coaches, I want to mention that there's conversation that Lincoln Riley, has got a commitment, for $15 million of NIL. Okay, this is stupid, unregulated, pay for play money that the NF or that the NCAA has no guts to control and regulate. And this is where we're headed because they have no system in place, and the House settlement didn't do anything to stop it because of what we've talked about many times before. But basically, the big boys are now unabashedly going out and just securing, and even our team, Nebraska, Matt Rule hinted at the fact that he was given commitments about that he would have the resources he needed, which, everybody thinks they can do it with, 10 or $15 million. I hate to break it to you, but as soon as everybody gets to $15 million, Texas is going to be at 30. Ohio State's going to be at 35. The big boys are just going to keep amping it up, and this thing is going to get crazy.
Right. But I wanted to talk a bit about Pat Fitzgerald because he was announced as the replacement coach at Michigan State. And I saw some people online, bemoaning it and, Michigan State fans being worried about it because obviously Pat did not have a great exit at Northwestern. He was 1-11 in his final year when he got fired. Looking at his coaching record at Northwestern, he was there for a long time, over 15 years, and had, kind of up and down records, right? Like he'd have a 10-3 year and then a 5-7 year and then a 9-5 year and then a 3-9 year. Now, obviously that's with, Northwestern's, ability to recruit and money in a pre-NIL era. Now it's all very different now.
He's got a whole new level of everything. They got new facilities there at Michigan State that they just recently opened in the last couple of years. He's going to have NIL money that he, that didn't even exist last time he was coaching college football. That's the big question mark. I don't have any question about his ability to coach or to probably put together a darn good Big Ten knowledgeable and experienced staff. He's going to do very, very well in those areas. And he's a dynamic guy. The only question is how much is he going to be supported by Michigan State's money, and if he can get the money, all the other pieces are in place for them to improve significantly.
Right,
I'm a believer.
Okay,
I'm a believer in him.
Yeah, to me, he strikes me as a very solid coach. Like if you're looking for bringing stability to your program, I think he'd be good for that. I'm not sure that he is, the guy to go out there and win you a Big Ten championship. But maybe that's not what Michigan State's looking to do right now.
Well, you know what? Yeah. If, they are looking to do that, but they're maybe more realistic in recognizing that they're not going to be able to swing for the fences and get Urban Meyer to come walking through the door. Right. So short of that, I think Pat Fitzgerald is a damn good consolation prize, if you will, in the whole situation. He's been away from the game for a few years. He's been able to take a fresh start. He's been able to revitalize himself, I'm sure. and he's going to be fired up.
Yeah.
With coach.
But observant fans will notice in all of this coaching carousel we've been talking about, we have not talked about one school that kind of kicked off the coaching carousel this year, which was Penn State. Now the rumors were swirling and heavy that Kalani Sitake, probably butchering that name, but he's the current coach at BYU. Now BYU is like his dream job. You know, he was a alumni from there, and he's a Mormon,
right? Mormon, Hawaiian.
Right.
Yep.
So, you know, and they're obviously doing very well there, playing in the Big 12 championship this year. So sounds like, you know, Penn State offered him some big money, and some of the boosters there at BYU came together and, you know, were able to boost up his contract, extend him further, promise him more NIL.
A bunch of NIL.
Yep. So he's announced that he's staying put at BYU, which kind of leaves Penn State holding out their hat and looking at what's left after all these other schools have already taken the best coaches.
Exactly. It looks like a Steve Peterson, Nebraska coaching search from back in the day when we ended up with
Bill Callahan,
about our fifth. Yeah, Bill Callahan, who was like our fifth or sixth choice because the guy he thought he was going to get, you know, never got on the plane.
Right.
So
well,
oops.
And you know, we were critical of the James Franklin firing at the time because, you know, James hadn't done like that badly, right? They were just in the playoff last year, right? And came so close against that Oregon team that's so good this year, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, the joke that you, I, and your friend Brian have been making is like, well, maybe Brian Kelly, you know, hot off of his firing from LSU, might get a call. But to me, Brian Kelly clearly has some baggage from a personality perspective and his history. And B, I think at best he is a lateral move in terms of coaching talent compared to James Franklin. You know, who are you to get out there that's better, obviously, than James to make that firing, you know, worth your while?
Exactly, because you spent a lot of money. I've heard the rumors about, well, you know, his buyout got cut, you know, diminished down to $9 or $10 million instead of the whatever 45 million that they owed him. And I have a hard time believing that that's true unless they had something that could have majorly damaged his reputation, or, you know, was illegal activity that they are agreeing to keep under the rug. But otherwise, he will ultimately get a lot of that money. And the other irony, of course, is he has always been an excellent recruiter. I mean, Penn State has regularly, under Franklin, you know, been a top 10 recruiting destination, right? He has been a great recruiter, and he has made it his life's passion, apparently, to steal the entire Penn State class. Because from what I heard just a few hours ago, on the eve of early signing day here tomorrow, Penn State won't be signing one player. That every one of their recruits has decommitted, and many of them have gone to Virginia Tech to follow Franklin.
Right. Yeah, I saw that as well. It should be noted, you are correct that Franklin's buyout has been reduced from 49 million to 9 million, but that's because of the Virginia Tech hiring and Virginia Tech paying James, you know, a good chunk of that, you know, that money that he's owed. So, you know, if he's getting paid that by a different university, you know, Penn State owes him less. I think that's how most of these buyout deals are structured nowadays.
Well, but in the case of us and Matt Rule, I can tell you that we were able to take advantage of way more than $9 million of his contract with the Carolina Panthers, and we were able to basically get a discount on Matt Rule for the first 2 or 3 years that he was our coach, because of the money. So I'm shocked if that was the setup, then Penn State's athletic director, which would have been the previous one, not the one that's there now, because he's only been there for a few years, would have been a bad contract arrangement.
Right. And so now this leaves us at 15 coaches, 15 major coaches fired over the course of this year, for a total of $228 million in buyout money, not even accounting for then the new contracts for all the new coaches.
Right. And keep in mind that now these new staffs, they're not just 10 assistant coaches. These staffs now number in the 30 or 40 people. When you start talking about all the general manager activities that are required to manage your roster from a NIL and revenue share standpoint, and how you put together your roster, all the other specialists and strength and conditioning folks, and then the fact that you no longer are limited to 10 coaches. So a lot of staffs have already ballooned to 15 or 16 coaches. So you start doing the math on that, and the number grows even greater.
Right. All right. And so now to finish off this podcast, we of course have to talk about the new playoff rankings that were announced today as recording this on December 2nd, and their implications for the conference championship games this weekend and the upcoming 12-team playoff. You know, what scenarios could play out based on how these championship games go. So looking at the rankings, obviously one of the big changes was Texas A&M, who was at number 3, fell 4 spots down to number 7. So all those other teams kind of moved up one position as a result. So going down the list, we have Ohio State 1, Indiana 2, Georgia 3, Texas Tech 4, Oregon 5, Ole Miss 6, Texas A&M 7. Then you have Oklahoma, who didn't move at all, at number 8. Then Alabama at 9 and Notre Dame at 10. So that was a change. Alabama moved up 1 spot from the week before. Then BYU at 11, Miami at 12, and Texas at 13, having moved up 3 spots after their win over an A&M. Vanderbilt at 14 and Utah at 15.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. That's what that is. And the thing that I am frustrated with is, and we've talked about this. I know you've presented all the logic, and I get it. But how we sit here today, staring at 5 SEC teams that are in the mix there, based on those top 16.
Right.
Top 15. 16 is USC, so that would be another Big Ten school. But you've got Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Alabama, Texas at 13, Vanderbilt at 14. And so already, you know that you're gonna get the conference winner. So that's what, Georgia against Alabama.
Right.
So one of those two is going to be the automatic and is going to get the bye. But then whoever loses that game probably still in it based on history. And then you're going to have Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma, who don't even participate in that are all in it. Right. So
I was listening to a talk show talking about the new playoff rankings after, you know, these new ones were announced. And it was sort of interesting in that, you know, people have brought up the eye test, you know, for Alabama in a positive way in the past, you know, saying like, oh, they're playing, you know, best football in the country right now, you know, even though maybe they weren't earlier in the season or whatever. But this time it's a little bit the opposite, where statistically, you know, they're 10-2 or whatever, and, you know, have these good stats, these good numbers. But if you look at their play on the field, you know, they've made some big mistakes. You know, like I said, they nearly lost to this Auburn team just here recently.
Right.
So the eye test for Alabama maybe isn't as strong as, like, you know, Miami or some of these other teams that are just outside the top 12. But, you know, the statistics are kind of playing in their favor this time.
Right. Exactly. So, well, and you know, you start looking at these teams, okay? Like Oklahoma, they beat Michigan. They lost to Texas. They lost to Ole Miss. They beat Alabama by 2 points in a game that, frankly, Alabama should have won. They barely beat an LSU squad that I guess the Missouri victory would also be considered a good one, but they barely beat LSU. They barely beat Tennessee. It's just, it bothers me that so many of these SEC schools find themselves way up there at the top. And then you look at their schedule, and 4 of those victories on all of those teams are playing nobodies, with the exception of Oklahoma, who did play Michigan as one of their 4 non-conference games.
Right.
So I'll give them that.
Well, and Alabama played against Florida State, which on paper you would say was a good non-conference matchup. Of course, they played them in a year where Florida State was bad, but ironically still lost to them in the end.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Well, which is what they were discussing about Texas, right? Because Texas played Ohio State right at the beginning of the year, obviously lost that game. But the committee people said that's fine, that they lost to the number 1 team in the country, but they lost to Florida and lost badly. And so that's what's really keeping them out of the conversation, or else we'd, maybe in a world where we end up with 6 SEC teams or whatever.
Well, and understand that depending on what all transpires this weekend, they're still clamoring. I mean, there are articles being written every day from all the media folks that Texas has on their payroll, pushing and pushing and pushing to try to sneak into this thing, and that includes the SEC conference. So trust me when I tell you that if the SEC could find a way to bully Texas into the mix, they're going to do it.
Yeah. But Miami is above them in the current rankings.
Oh yeah.
So I don't think,
and they're more deserving than Notre Dame. Miami is. If you look at comparison of Miami's schedule and Notre Dame's, there's no way that Notre Dame should be in the mix before Miami.
Right. So now talking about some scenarios that could play out here. Some of the most interesting games to watch, because the committee, rightfully so in my opinion, has made it a point that they're not going to punish teams for losing in the conference championship game. It can only benefit you, right, from playing in a conference championship game. So that means like Alabama and Georgia, right, regardless of who wins, they're both in. Indiana, Ohio State, right, regardless of who wins, they're both in.
I get Indiana and Ohio State because Indiana's number 2 and Ohio State's number 1. But when Georgia's number 3 and Alabama's number 9, and now if Georgia were to say, really have a controlled win where they win, 38-7 or 38-10, are you telling me Alabama's still going to be in?
Well, yes, because Notre Dame's the one who will be knocked off, because here are the more interesting matchups, right? You have BYU versus Texas Tech, right, in the Big 12.
Yep.
And then you have Duke versus Virginia.
Right. And Virginia's 17 and Duke is unranked.
Right. Well, yes, Virginia's currently 17 and BYU is ranked 11, right? So they're right there on kind of the edge, behind both Notre Dame and Alabama. But what would be interesting is if BYU beats Texas Tech, right? So then they're definitely in, because they're the conference champion, and Texas Tech, who's currently number 4, isn't falling that, is definitely in, right?
No.
They're not going to get pushed out.
Correct.
So in that world, Notre Dame, right, who's currently at 10, would potentially be the one to get pushed out.
You're telling me there won't be some massive outcry and there won't be an effort to keep Notre Dame in the mix while they stand on the sidelines and do nothing, and Alabama gets beat by 20 points by Georgia. So clearly Georgia's the better of the 2 teams. Just as this, I'm walking through a scenario. And then what you said about the BYU Texas Tech thing were to come to pass, that they would push Notre Dame out and keep Alabama in.
Well,
see, I don't believe that.
But if I'm an Alabama fan, I would say, well, it's about the totality of your record, not just
I understand.
who's playing the best at the end, and Alabama beat Georgia earlier this year.
Then put Miami in there because Miami beat Notre Dame.
True,
if I remember correctly. So, I don't know how you can argue that Alabama deserves to remain in that mix if they lose handily to Georgia. And and what happens to other teams shouldn't factor into that much, but yet it will. And I understand we want people to play in these conference championship games, so we can't punish them for losing in a conference championship game. They're losing to a good team, blah 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 blah. God, I just can't wait till we get to 9 games. Can't wait till we get to the SEC playing 9 freaking games.
Well, and that's just next year. So there you go.
Let's hope. I'll believe that when I see it.
Yeah. All right. You keep doubted over there. Just to clear it up, Miami is 2 losses this year are to SMU and to Louisville. And they did beat Notre Dame by 3 points early in the year, their first game.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
But the even crazier scenario is with the ACC. I've learned apparently, the ACC has these archaic rules in terms of determining who plays in their conference championship game. Some conferences have a clause in there about, whoever's higher ranked in the college football playoff, that would be a tie-breaking factor. If that was the case, then Virginia would be playing against Miami, right? Because Miami is the highest ranked team of the ACC right now. But because of these complex tiebreaker rules, they're not even playing in that conference championship game, right? And instead it's Duke versus Virginia.
Right. So assuming that Virginia wins, then Virginia, who is currently 17th in this ranking, is going to get the automatic bid, so to speak, for the ACC, right? And they'll force that. They'll make that happen somehow. They'll move them up and have them jump USC and Utah and Vanderbilt and Texas and probably Miami and Florida to get them up into that mix. That's what they're going to do.
Yep.
For beating a 7-5 Duke.
Yep.
Right. That would be like them playing Nebraska and a Nebraska victory compelling them up into the playoff. I mean,
right. Well, that's because we're guaranteeing the conference champions, right? The top 5 conference champions get in. Which also obviously includes the group of 5, which are doing their own games this weekend. But the really crazy scenario, because Duke's not even in the top 25 at all. So if Duke beats Virginia, even though Virginia's beaten them earlier in the year, Duke would be the conference champion. But like you say, they're 7-5. So they aren't necessarily going to be one of the higher ranked conference champions. Whereas from the group of 5 right now, on the bottom end, you have Tulane at 20, North Texas at 24, and James Madison at 25. So if North Texas and Tulane play each other, so one of those two is definitely going to be, and the highest ranked group of 5 team.
Right.
So that in the more traditional scenario, the winner of that game basically gets in no matter what. But if James Madison wins in the Sun Belt championship game, now they would probably be higher ranked than a ACC champion Duke. So the ACC gets completely left out, and we have 2 group of 5 champions in the playoff.
Right. Exactly.
So that's what I'm hoping happens, just for the chaos of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That would be crazy, because then James Madison would get in as the group of 5 representative, and say North Texas or Tulane would get in as the 4th highest ranked conference champion. Right.
Which that would hopefully, if that does happen, that would convince the ACC to change up their tiebreaker rules. And I hope it would also maybe motivate the ACC and the Big 12 to have a few more conversations about how about we just go ahead and get some guaranteed spots in this future 16-team playoff, and let's get going with this thing instead of leaving it up to
people to make these decisions in a
Well,
boardroom that pick these CFPs every week.
But in the scenario we just mentioned, right, if Duke wins, then it's totally legitimate for James Madison, to get in over them, right, because of their record and everything, and the team that they are compared to Duke. So that just comes down to the ACC cannibalizing each other, this season.
Yes.
And their weird rules that leave Miami out of their championship.
Correct. I get that. I understand that that's what caused that. But
the other thing I'm personally hoping is the scenario we mentioned where I guess it would be BYU, being Texas Tech, and then Notre Dame getting pushed out because of that. I'd be happy with that because that kind of punishes Notre Dame for not being in a conference and not playing a conference championship, since that is clearly valued by the committee, and that would maybe motivate Notre Dame once again to consider joining a conference.
Right. I agree. It's crazy is what it amounts to. All this stuff is crazy. And here's the thing. I don't think the Texas Tech BYU game will necessarily, it might be very, very entertaining, but there's an equal chance that Texas Tech is just a better team and maybe wins comfortably. Okay. The Duke Virginia game is probably not going to be watched by many people other than Duke and Virginia, unless Duke is leading in the fourth quarter, and then a bunch of eyeballs will come to it, and then Ohio State Indiana will be an interesting game, and Georgia Alabama will be an interesting game because it's the SEC, right? But the Big 12 and the ACC matchups really won't carry the mail in terms of national interest of the casual sports fan. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and what I was going to say was what we kind of talked about off the podcast, which is how I know you're disappointed the Big Ten doesn't get more teams this year, but we kind of had a better layout of our records, as a conference last year, right? And so we got in more last time, whereas this time we're more top heavy, right? If you look at the top 5 teams,
Right.
3 of them are from the Big Ten. But then that means that, your next ranked teams, right? USC and Michigan all have 3 losses. So Michigan's at 19, right? So they're too far out of contention to really get in any scenario.
Because they have 3 losses, partially because they played 9 conference games. So they have to have 3 more wins or 3 more losses than the SEC teams.
Yes. Well,
so imagine some of those SEC teams like in Oklahoma, who's been up and down and barely winning a bunch of games. Imagine them having to have played Georgia during the regular season this year as their 9th conference game and not getting to have another patsy in their non-conference schedule.
Right.
Then they would have 3 losses, and they might be on the outside looking in.
Yep.
That's my point about this loss thing, this 3rd loss versus 2 losses. So in my opinion, we would be looking at, okay, Michigan's a better football team than they were at the beginning of the year. Oklahoma has been up and down throughout the season. Maybe Michigan is right there next to Oklahoma now. USC having beaten Michigan and having played and succeeded against a lot of teams except for the very, very top teams like Oregon, they've got every reason to justify themselves being in the mix.
Right. So. Well, I'll just say I'll be happy next year when the SEC does go to 9 conference games, and then it'll be equitable on that front. So we won't get into these debates as much.
Exactly.
Yes. All right. So now we have to, of course, predict the conference championship games. And we will mention real quick in terms of the group of 5, we won't predict these, but North Texas has to play against Tulane in the AAC, and then James Madison is playing against Troy in the Sun Belt. So as we mentioned, those have some potential playoff implications themselves. But we'll start with Duke versus Virginia. That's happening in Charlotte in North Carolina. So obviously Duke fans will be out in force for that one, even though they're the underdogs. But do you think that's enough to give them the edge to win the game?
No, I think Virginia's the better football team, and you're really not talking about that much distance. And Duke is a small school, a private school relative to Virginia. That's probably quite a bit larger. So as far as alumni and access to Charlotte, I suspect that Virginia will still have a more dominant quantity of fans than Duke will. That just would be my thought. But I could be wrong.
I will say Duke is currently 7-5 overall as a team. They lost to Virginia just on November 15th, so about 2 weeks ago, 34-17. So that would
Right.
lead me to suggest that Virginia should win that game. But whenever you get a rematch within the same
Right.
season, I always kind of give it a little bit of an edge to the team that lost because they
Right.
know what mistakes they made previously. The other team
Right.
could get complacent, thinking, "Oh, we've already beaten these guys." I feel like the slight edge there goes to the team that lost if they can capitalize on it, especially early in a game.
Right. They're more motivated to make changes, right? That cause maybe different outcomes or different, weaknesses and strengths to be exposed versus the team that won, where the team that won is going to be like, okay, the formula we used to be successful the first time, we're going to try to use a similar formula this next time. You don't reinvent the wheel if you were successful. So I'm still going to predict Virginia's going to win, but I would agree with you that maybe it'll be a closer game in terms of score. So Virginia is going to win that game like 28-21.
Okay. I'm thinking similar, but I'm going to say Virginia wins 35-24 over Duke.
Okay.
Then BYU versus Texas Tech in the Big 12. Another rematch where Texas Tech beat them earlier in the year. This one is being played in Arlington, Texas. So obviously, once again, the Texas Tech fans, have closer proximity to that game.
Yep.
So they kind of get the advantage there, along with, them being the higher ranked team, them beating BYU earlier in the year. So what's your thoughts on that one?
I think Texas Tech wins very comfortably in this one. I'm going to say this one ends up being somewhat lopsided, and I'm going to say I do need to think of the dynamics of BYU just re-securing their coach. Right? There's got to be some positive momentum from that. So I'm still gonna say that Texas Tech wins the game, but BYU plays inspired, and it's going to end up being closer, just because of that, off the field circumstance. So let's go 35-31 Texas Tech.
I like it. That would be a good game if that's how it plays out. They played on November 8th, and Texas Tech won 29-7 over BYU. So BYU's offense clearly struggled in that one. But, BYU has had some wins to end out their season, so they have some positive momentum on that front.
Well, and they beat Utah. I mean, they pounded Utah earlier in the year. I remember that.
Well, they did beat Utah, but they didn't pound them. It was 24-21.
Okay, but I guess I'm just thinking in terms of running. But I don't know. My memory was that they physically beat a Utah team that I thought was going to win that game. Because I'm a big fan of Utah's coach.
Yeah. The BYU team has had some chaos here because, like you said, it seemed like their coach was going to leave, for Penn State, which would have been quite a shocker to them. But the fact that he's staying kind of stabilizes things. So I'm going to go ahead and say this one, the upset actually does happen. And BYU is able to, throw some new things at Texas Tech and surprise them. I'll admit I have not followed the Big 12 as closely this year, so I'm not as knowledgeable about all these teams. But I think maybe it'll be a lower scoring game in that case. So let's say BYU wins 24-21 over Texas Tech.
Okay.
All right. Then in the SEC, we have Georgia, Alabama. This one's happening in Atlanta. So once again, favoritism to the Georgia fans there in terms of location. Alabama beat them earlier this year, but as we went into on our previous discussion, both teams have kind of struggled offensively here as of late. It is a bit of an odd one. And I remember the previous game was a bit of an odd one too. I kind of thought that Georgia would win it, but then Alabama kind of played more inspired than they had throughout a lot of the season. Carson Beck there at Georgia is like a good quarterback, but he's not great, right? And he sometimes can't make passes or make some mistakes. So yeah, this is gonna be an interesting one.
Yeah. So what are you thinking on this? Which one are you going with?
I think just based off of what I saw from Alabama, and how if Auburn, was able to complete some passes and not get, these favors from the refs, they very well might have won that game. And then, Alabama wouldn't even be in the conversation anymore. I think I'm going to lead, and the fact that Georgia lost before, it has that motivation. I'm going to lead Georgia's way. So I'm going to say that they win it, in a slugfest, or I should say a physical contest, but maybe not so high a scoring of points. So let's say kind of similar to their previous game, it'll be something like 27 Georgia to 24 Alabama, but it goes Georgia's way this time.
That's good. That's a good one. Okay, I'll go with the exact same score, but Alabama wins.
Then their previous game was 24-21 to be specific.
Okay, but I'm going to go with the score you predicted, but with an Alabama victory, because I'm going to speculate that Alabama is going to recognize that they almost laid an egg and at Auburn, and they're going to come out and play cleaner, crisper football. And I just feel like their offense is just a little bit more explosive than Georgia's. Georgia's got a good defense. And Georgia has 9 lives, man. They find a way to come back from behind, right? Like they've done that like 2 or 3 times this year. So I'm not super confident in this pick, but I'm going to pick Alabama.
All right. It does appear Georgia is 2.5 favorites according to Vegas right now.
Okay, so that's practically a pick 'em.
Not to mention the fact that it's sort of a home game for Georgia because of the location, as I mentioned. So yeah. When you factor that in as well, really is a pick 'em. And then lastly, we have Indiana, Ohio State, number 1 versus number 2. The two Titans in the Big Ten who have not played each other. So this one,
right,
out of all 3 matchups, is the only fresh one, that we haven't seen earlier in the year.
Right.
So I'm sure it'll get plenty of eyeballs. Now, Ohio State kind of embarrassed Indiana when they played in the regular season last year. But This Indiana team is different, right? More confident than they were last time. So what do you think?
I think Ohio State's going to win again. And I think they're just the better team. And unless Ohio State makes a bunch of mistakes, okay? Because that's what Kurt Cignetti has been able, that's one of the big keys to his success over these last couple of years is his team has been very disciplined, and they don't hurt themselves very much. And Ohio State takes a few more risks, is so athletic that they tend to do that. And I just think they have way more athletes, and they will overcome the maybe few mistakes they make and beat Indiana. And it's a conference championship game, which ironically, a lot of the conference championship games have been somewhat lopsided in the Big Ten conference championship history. So I'm going to say Ohio State's going to win it, and it's going to be 45-21.
Wow. Okay, I should mention, that this one is in Indianapolis. So once again, Indiana has the advantage of location there.
Yep, they do. But Ohio State fans aren't far away. And trust me, Columbus to Indy is nothing. And it's like 2.5 hours. So, and Bloomington is maybe 2. So the distance to Indianapolis is almost, just slightly shorter for Bloomington.
Now, I will say, on the one hand, Ohio State has the monkey off of their back in terms of Michigan, right? They won the national championship last year, but they lost to Michigan. They've lost to them for the past 4 years. So I think getting that was huge for Ryan Day in terms of his legacy at Ohio State and for a lot of those players. So I could see there being a world where they play lights out against Indiana and crush them like your score suggests. On the other hand, when you look at their schedule, Ohio State did get a bit of a favorable schedule this year. Like Michigan.
They did.
Michigan was kind of the toughest team they've played all year. Well, they did play Texas, obviously, right at the beginning of the year.
Right. But they didn't have to play Oregon.
Right. They had that tough test. Whereas, yes, Indiana did play against Oregon and beat them. So for that reason, and, to be a little contrarian here, I'm going to say that Indiana has learned from how they lost last year and is more battle tested than Ohio State is, along with them having a lot of their rabid fans out there for this game. So I'm going to predict that Indiana wins it in a narrow victory. That'll be exciting to watch. 35 Indiana to 30 Ohio State.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent.
Very cool. So we'll be coming to you next week, talk about the results of these conference championship games and where the playoff committee ended up with their rankings, what our 12-team playoff is going to be this year. As we mentioned, there's some potential for some craziness to go on. So personally, I think that'd be fun since it's not coming at the expense of any of the teams I care about. So let's see it happen. Right. And then we'll see, who the matchups are, see if, because Ohio State, even if they lose to Indiana, right, they're not dropping out of the top 4 seeds, most likely. So they're going to get the bye this year. So will it be a different team? Ohio State was the one who had to play in the first round and kind of got the momentum going last year. So is that going to happen with a different team and they're going to catch fire and kind of dominate everybody on the way to the championship?
Exactly. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out this year versus last year. I think last year was a combination of things that led to that circumstance. I think it'll be a more equitable, buy versus no buy. It won't be the same as it was last year. If it is, then that will really be something. That'll be something people talk about.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, we hope you out there enjoyed listening to this episode. I know this was a long one, but there was a lot to get to today. You can email us at collegefootballthrowdown@gmail.com. You can also search for College Football Throwdown on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. You can also find us on YouTube and subscribe to us there for our occasional video podcast episodes. So thank you out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me for this episode. Until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.